Focus on your studies, focus on your studies, focus on your studies. That's what you should be doing, right? But the cost of student life is crazy expensive. Books, tuition, rent, socializing, it all adds up. How can you focus on your studies if you're worried about putting food on the table or even paying rent? In this video, I'll be describing the approach you should take to determine whether you should pick up a part-time job or focus on your studies. Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Linsky, a management professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management. Using my professor experience over the past decade, I create weekly videos to give students the additional support they need to thrive, and sometimes just survive, when in university. But don't expect me to explain any of those complicated concepts you might find in algebra or chemistry, no. Instead, I cover concepts that are not taught in the classroom, but generally learned the hard way throughout university life. So, if you're in uni or college or will be soon, click subscribe and check out my weekly clips to learn a little more about managing student life easier. In this video, I'll be discussing my practical approach to determine whether you should focus on your studies during school or whether you can pick up a part-time job. But the same answer does not apply to everybody, as everybody's situation is incredibly different. Some people are fortunate enough to not have to worry about money. Others want to continue school after education, whereas others want to jump right into work. I'll be walking you through my decision tree that forces you to consider different elements of your situation when you're trying to figure out whether you should focus on your studies or whether you can make some money on the side. The first question you should be asking yourself is, can you afford to go to school without working at all? In order to figure that out, map the next 3, 4, 5 years, or however long it takes for you to finish your degree on a piece of paper. Think costs, income streams, and savings. In terms of costs, what are the total amount of costs you expect to have each term, and what is the total amount going to be at the end of your schooling? Consider big ticket items such as tuition, rent, food, books, and even socializing. In terms of income, think scholarships, summer jobs, and anything you can beg, borrow, or steal from your parents. Once you have a good understanding of your costs, income streams, and savings, put it all in the same spreadsheet. How much bigger are your costs than your incomes and savings? But don't freak out once you first calculate it, because that number will be big. And in this case, size does matter. Can you afford to get a loan for that amount? Do you want a loan that big? And how long will it take for you to pay back that loan? All in all, you'll need to wrap your head around the idea of whether you can attend school without working. If the answer to the previous question was no, you can't afford to go to school without working, you should consider grants, bursaries, and scholarships available at your institution. Now, while I recommend all students to actively seek out and apply to scholarships available, there are scholarships specifically designed for those with financial need. So target those first. And I know you're thinking that scholarships can be crazy competitive. While the big ones generally are, the smaller ones generally are not. In fact, at the last university I worked at, I was told by multiple administration that several scholarships every single year went unobtained because nobody applied for them. So if there are no scholarships available or you've been unsuccessful when applying for them, there's no question here, you should be working, because you can't afford to go to school without work. On the flip side, if you're fortunate enough to have scholarships available and you've even won them, that gives you more options. And that also takes us to the next question. Do you know what you want to do after school? Now, you'd also access this question if you can afford to go to school without work. So for me, this is a big one. My view is that you go to school to get a job afterwards. Now, I know there are a variety of outliers out there of people that don't have degrees and that have become crazy successful. But for most of us normal people, you need a degree or a diploma in order to get a job. So what you do during school should be geared towards that final goal. And more specifically, what you do during your undergrad should be geared towards what you're trying to accomplish after you graduate. Knowing what you want to do after school better allows you to manage your time appropriately during school. But if you're like me and have no clue what you wanted to do after school, then you should ask yourself, do you have good grades? Now, it's at this part of the decision tree where things truly get strategic. You don't need to work during school, but you can choose to work during school if you think it maximizes your chances of getting what you want later on, even if you don't know exactly what that is. So let's face it, grades are important. So even if you don't know what you want to do after school, your best bet is to ensure that you have good grades, as that keeps as many options available for you down the road. So if you don't have good grades, and good is relative to what you think good is, then your best bet is to focus on your grades. Focus on your academics and try to ramp up your GPA, even if it is just a little bit. However, if you're on the flip side and have good grades, Again, that opens up more doors and gives you more options to consider. But let's backtrack a second. Say you did know what you wanted to do after school. Well, what is it? In this decision tree, I'm considering 3 different scenarios: a year off, school, and work. So for those of you taking a year off, I recommend you work during school. It's going to cost you money to travel and explore, and to take a year off, right, it's going to be expensive. So it's better you start saving now. So for those of you who know that you want to go into school after graduation, you should be asking yourself, does my desired graduate school prefer grades over other experiences? And if the answer is yes, they value grades over experiences, then you should clearly focus on your academics. Now, I know you're thinking, well, of course they value grades over other experiences. Schools always care about marks, but that's not always the case. There's a growing number of graduate schools that are preferring more balanced students. In fact, med schools across Canada are increasingly considering removing MCAT scores from their selection criteria, again, to promote the acceptance of more balanced students. They know that book smarts is important to becoming a physician. However, they also realize that multiple skill sets and having multiple perspectives is important to excelling in their practice. So, it is on you to contact your desired graduate program or do research into your desired graduate program to figure out what are the selection criteria, and more specifically, what are the weights associated with those selection criteria. So if your desired graduate school does not appear to value grades over other experiences, then you should be asking yourself, do you have other experiences to include on your resume? If the answer is no, you've been focusing solely on getting grades to try to increase your GPA as much as possible, which is great, by the way, then I recommend you work or volunteer. These behaviors will demonstrate your ability to balance multiple demands, as well as would also signal your interest in a particular area. For example, if you volunteer at a physio clinic, that would signal you are serious about becoming a physiotherapist. On the flip side, if yes, you do have other experiences to include on your resume, I recommend you take a step back and analyze your CV right now. What do you need to do right now to increase your chances of getting into the graduate program later on? For those of you who want to get right into work after school, you need to ask yourself, do you currently have work experience? If the answer is no, then you should definitely try to find a job or volunteer. Ideally, you try to find something in your area of study, but if you can't, that's okay. Future employers will see that you've worked previously and associate this with maturity, ability to multitask, ability to take self-direction, and a whole host of other facets that are only learned while working in organizations. If you do have work experience, then you need to ask, is that experience in your field? Surely work experience in your field is preferable over work experiences in other areas when you're applying for a job. So, if you don't have work experience in your field, you should actively look for opportunities in your area, whether that includes paid or unpaid opportunities. If you are fortunate enough to have work experience in your area, 1, you're incredibly lucky, and 2, you should critically analyze your CV further to figure out ways to strengthen it. So that's it. That's my approach to determining whether you should work during school. If you found this video interesting, or you're interested in hearing other tips to make student life more manageable, hit the subscribe button, smash the like, and check out my video next week.